Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. And today we have a very special guest with us, Zomba, joining us.
Um,
What up, Zomba? And of course, Ramses and Tony as well. Bam, a little absent, but it's okay. We're going to get right into some of these spicy topics. Zomba coming hot off of a win at Crown 3. Congratulations. That is your first super
Thanks.
major win. I know a lot of people will throw the word major around, but that was an incredibly stacked tournament. Congratulations on that. And I mean, how are you feeling after the win? Do you want to talk about your run or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, the run itself was really good. It was a lot of repeats actually, which I tried avoiding. I actually sent one of those conflicts because I was like, I kind of don't want to rematch Tweak and Leo, but then I had to do it, and then I won. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. But the actual run, honestly, I feel like the most impressive win I got, which not a lot of people talk about, was my Sonics win,
Yes.
which was that was what started the actual okay, I'm not just going off of being good from Battle of BC and doing okay at Kagaribi. It's I actually just got another real win after all of that, which kind of my last sets of Sonics have been really bad, so I was pretty glad I got that win, and then it kind of all came together. So that was a nice event.
Yeah, and I'm always curious, just the perspective of a R.O.B player. I mean, I'm assuming you've played R.O.B most of your professional career, and how is it like playing a character that everyone seems to be ready for, right? Like there's no way you matchup check someone with R.O.B, right? Like I feel like that's impossible, at least nowadays, 4 or 5 years into the metas.
Yeah. Rob doesn't really matchup check, but he more player checks. Like when you go for someone like Big Boss and me, yeah, Leo and Big Boss have probably played a lot together, right? It's not even oh my god, they're both Mexican players. It's they literally have played so many times with each other in a lot of grind sessions. But the difference is me and Big Boss play in two very unique ways where it's you can be proficient in his version of fighting R.O.B, but if I'm playing different in that differently, and it's also I'm playing differently in a good way, it can still be very good for me because it's you're playing with the knowledge of fighting that specific R.O.B, and then when you fight versus something that catches you off guard, it kind of starts to crumble. I fought I fought Ouch before, and I've had a lot of sets of Jackal, and when I fought versus Ouch, I struggled and I even lost a set because it felt like I was playing too much like I was fighting Jackal and not like I was fighting Ouch. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's the same way with people who very good versus R.O.B, where it's more they might be adapted to a specific type of R.O.B, but not necessarily the full character itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like another big question mark for everyone is when did because right now I feel like you're contesting into that top 5, top 10 area, right? Obviously having back-to-back wins against Leo and Tweak, right? And now really pushing into that top 5 area because these are, consistent top 5 players that you're getting back-to-back wins on, back-to-back tournaments. And I feel like the ramp up started at Kagaribi, you know what I mean? Because I feel like you had that crazy performance at Smash World Tour finals, right? That felt like your breakout. And then
Yeah.
you were still getting into those top 8s, and then you kind of started slumping down into the 9th and the 13th. But then at Kagaribi you got 9th, which, to be fair, 9th at Kagaribi is still a very, very good placement. That
Yeah.
tournament's so hard to get even just into the top 16 area, right? So do you feel like that Japan trip really helped your perspective on the game or helped you improve a lot?
Yeah, the Japan trip definitely was changing for my mentality. I basically found respect for my opponents, which made it which made it a lot better to I don't know, just compete. I stopped getting harder on myself, or yeah, I stopped getting hard on myself when I lost. I'd still be okay, this is what I should be doing and stuff like that. But I wasn't damn, I wasn't being overly toxic towards myself when I lost and stuff like that. And I was keeping more a fresh perspective when I was fighting people. Yeah, I could go into fighting someone like Tweak or Leo, where it's oh, these people have a lot of experience. These people really like fighting R.O.B. I'm mostly going to be the one everyone assumes going to lose, which I have lost to them before. But it's I actually heard a quote from you when I was listening to one of your videos or something, and it was nerves only really happen when you're like thinking about the past or like the future,
Right.
but not necessarily the present. And I was like, yeah, he's like, look, he right. And I started thinking about that, and then I kind of like calmed down a lot of nerves that I would have when playing, which is like, you know, kind of helps. And when you said about me being like getting in that top 10, top 5 range, I think like I could definitely do it, but for right now, I still have to prove that like okay, two really good results back to back, and I guess the third one with Kagaribi is like, obviously like very good, but I still gotta like showcase like do it a third time. Like there's still Gommel this season, and there's like just smaller like tournaments sprinkled in. I definitely think like if I continue the momentum and don't like just ride off the high and like, oh my god, I won crown, I won the last major, untouchable. If I do that, then I'll definitely like go back to like where I was, where I was like good, but not as good. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
It's like that's kind of the hardest part when you finally do good and then you drop. You kind of have to like talk to yourself where it's like, you know what? You're not really like that good. You're not that guy. You know what I mean? And that's kind of like how it was with the past, where even during that time, like Smash Bros. Tour, when I was entering a lot of tournaments and I top eighted a lot, had a lot of good wins. But then there was like just one tournament, and it's like, I fumbled, and it started becoming the next tournament after that, and the next one, and then I was like, okay, I am not that good anymore. And then it took the new perspective of like, maybe I should stop being so toxic towards myself. Maybe I should stop blaming my character as much. Maybe it's more of a me issue. And that's what kind of like helped break that barrier.
Yeah, huge stride in your
So
mentality. Yeah.
yeah, I have a question because I think it's
Yeah.
interesting that you mentioned this because like the way I look at coaching is like at the end of the day, like the only thing that limits everyone is like your approach to the game, right? Because like at the end of the day, if you lose to someone, it's like of course you lost to a person, but they like represent something that you didn't understand or you couldn't deal
Yeah.
with, right? So you talk a lot about like how your mindset changed. What was the biggest like difference in your gameplay that was caused by your mindset change?
I felt like I just played like I think it's just smarter, honestly. Like I kind of just kept more note with like what my opponent's resources are in like any given moment. Like let's say for example, I hit a true combo. I hit like nair forward air on someone, right? Now they have very limited options. It's like they ever
Mhm.
have jump where it's like, okay, jump forward air. Or they have like just kind of drift down and don't really do anything. And it's like, okay, that's like my advantage position just because of like where my forward air sent them. Or they can fight back. Usually then I'll be like, okay, what is a good option that pretty much covers most of it? And that in turn took me into like, okay, well, Rob's a character that kills really early, right? So I'll be more aware of what they do, and I'll basically go for like what would most likely kill here. Like, let's say if I think someone has a really bad jump habit, which is honestly a lot of top players
You call out a lot
I've
of jumps.
noticed. Yeah. I'll be like, okay, cover their jump, go for the jump read. Then it's like, if I hit that, they should be dead. And if it doesn't work, then it's like, okay, most of the time, if they're not jumping, then they're mostly being passive, which is then there really wasn't any risk for me going for that, and I could just go back to neutral and you know gyro laser. If it hits, back at advantage. If not, then it's like, okay, it's just neutral again. It's a pretty like solid game plan of like you kind of just got to think like the risk reward and everything and what space you cover, because Rock can cover a lot of space with his aerials, projectiles, and usually a lot of the characters that he does good versus don't really have a way to deal with that like space that he takes up. And or there's just matchups where even if they do beat Rob, sometimes it's still hard for them, like characters like Aegis, like if you have them like off stage, like honestly, I'm trolling if Aegis isn't dead when they're off stage. You know what I mean? Even if it's a hard matchup, like that's kind of like just how I shifted with my view. It's like I could be killing them, so you know what? why don't they like try playing a more approach of like actually going for stuff? Like, there's another thing where someone was like, they would rather lose trying to do something than not doing something, you know, which was like, yeah, like, you know what? I would rather try and make the play that I think is the smartest thing instead of like, you know, sitting back, just letting them do things on me. And it's like, it's kind of been better than other stuff that I've been doing. So, you know,
Yeah, it all works out.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned before that you feel that you do things differently in a better way or in a good way than Big Boss does it. What would you say that you do that is different in a good way than Big Boss or Anathema or one of these other top ROBs?
So here, I'll talk about our playstyles first. So obviously Anathema is more of like the combo rob, right? You know, 0 to deaths, always hits them. Pretty much the only thing like he labs. And then Big Boss is more, he can do 0 to death combos like pretty good, you know. And he also sometimes holds a box of you. But my Rob is more the one, you know, I fight with you. Like, right? Like I will be the one that like if I'm winning, it's gonna be off of something where it's like, you know, I got a good neutral win and I destroy you. Think of like me versus Tweak at Crown game 5, where it's like, you know, sometimes I just get the momentum and I just win without any like, you know, technical things needed. And the thing about that is that when you want to compete in top level, sure, like if I'm able to 0 to death MK Leo every single stock with a gyro combo, like, yeah, that'd be pretty cool. But realistically, that's not going to be happening. And in turn, it's like, it's kind of like when you're playing a game and you're like putting all your point values in like one thing.
Right.
It's like, say, technical, just fundamental aspects of the game, and then just like other like smaller stuff. I'm putting most of my points in like just fully understanding the game, which allows me to also be able to play like Lucina for problem matchups that I don't think Rob can do. That the Rob players that are currently worse than me, it's like they're more either split with like Big Boss being more, you know, technical, but also fundamentals, just worse fundamentals, and Anathema more just being a tech god. That doesn't work in top level, in my opinion. And I feel more Robs would have to just understand the game outside of just understanding how to use gyro, which is like, it's the biggest thing I've always pushed ever since I was a good player. And it's the thing that I feel they still struggle with, just because understanding a game through, say, the technical aspect and understanding the game through the fundamental aspect is like two different worlds that if you never really played on one side, you wouldn't understand the other side, right? Like my technical game, like I'm a top player and it's like, I suck with the technical combos. Like I'll do it once, maybe a tournament, but it's not like I'm hitting it so consistently. Like you're not a top player fighting me and thinking like, oh, I'm going to kill you at 0, you know? You're thinking like, oh, he's just going to be trying to fight me the whole game. And that's how he's like working, you know? And that's what I feel like all the other Robs struggle with, where it's like they're not really like understanding Ultimate. They're more understanding like Rob's combo game, which is can get figured out pretty easily once you get like higher and higher levels.
And to follow up on that, how do you think the Rob players should be fighting their opponents?
Well, there's just a lot of ways they could do that. For starters, I feel like Rob in general, he's more able to just like, let's say I'm fighting Aegis, right? I'm fighting Shuton. My main game plan versus fighting Shuton would be like, okay, I should either be trying to keep a good space away from him, like stay out of dash attack burst range, right? So I'll be playing outside of his burst range. Aegis, me. Jump naring, right? Throws projectiles. Aegis can't really contest anything I can really do just because it's like dash attack with punish, which is what I was doing a lot in our sets. Throws their own move out with punish because Rob's like, you know, pretty fast. And when I was like watching my sets back and like actually like, okay, this is what I was definitely doing really good. I noticed a lot of things that I used to get punished for. Like I would do like lazy bad nairs just because I was a little too close to them. That was what I started taking advantage of. Like I remember a specific sequence of me versus Leia where it's like he did like a neutral air with Byleth, like, like a neutral, like to cover his own space. But then I like called that out and it was like, okay, that was a free grab. You just let me get that off. And then I killed him for it. And it was like a good realization of like, yeah, like they could be having this like, space covered, but the sole fact that's like I'm still in control, even if they think they're in control, is what's really good about Rob. Like Rob is so broken. It's actually insane. A lot of stuff that I've been catching with people, like they'll do bad dash attacks and I'd be like, oh cool. I'll like punish it with a run up down tilt and then, imagination. It's like a lot of things with Rob has come down to like making sure you're at a good like good spacing, making sure you're like doing good with your baits with what people are doing, and a lot of stuff just comes with like then you start reacting and start thinking, and it's like pretty broken.
Nice.
But yeah,
So I forgot to show in the very beginning, so a little late show. But if you guys enjoy the content, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and make sure to check out Zomba on Metafy as well. He does a bunch of. Are you still coaching on Metafy, right? Okay, yeah. Make sure to
Yeah.
check out Zomba on Metafy, and the R.O.B Deconstructed is out as well.
Yeah, it's out.
Okay, so you can also check out the R.O.B Deconstructed on the Metafy platform as well, and you can also just get coaching from Zomba himself on Metafy. So make sure to check that out. I guess we can now pivot towards, and I love the analogy you made, or just like the analysis of all the different R.O.Bs. I think just a quick tidbit on that is it's interesting how different R.O.B players have different answers, right? I feel like your approach to the game is like, okay, it's a fundamental approach but you have been working on your tech. You've been working on your zero to deaths. You've been working on down tilt chains, which is a very important thing. Like, and I know you can even do down tilt in the up smash against certain characters, right?
Yeah.
So doing those are really good for either corner carry or comboing into a kill move. So you definitely have that on deck, and it's not like you ignore the tech, but it's more just like what's on the priority list, right? It seems like that's on the bottom of your priority list, and it's like, oh, if R.O.B has a bad matchup, instead of my answer, it's like, well, shit, this matchup sucks. I better zero to death the fuck out of this dude. Your approach is like, well, this matchup sucks. I should play Lucina and use my fundamentals and understanding of ultimate to beat out this bad matchup. So it's very interesting how the different top R.O.Bs are kind of finding answers in this current meta. And now to pivot onto the current meta of R.O.B, how do you feel like R.O.B does in this current meta? I think R.O.B obviously has been a mainstay in Ultimate's meta throughout every single era of Smash, but now we're in a very interesting late game form of the meta, right? Fighter Pass 2 is out. We got no more patches. R.O.B went under the radar. I don't know how with the whole time, didn't get hit once somehow. And yeah, I mean, I guess we could start with Fighter Pass 2. I think a lot of people always wonder when they talk about the current meta and a current character, it's like, well, how do they do against Fighter Pass 2? How do they do against Steven Kazuya? So how do you think R.O.B pairs up against Fighter Pass 2?
So Fighter Pass 2 in general for R.O.B, it's honestly, I'd say it's pretty even slightly R.O.B favor, and just in general. I think I start with the good. So I actually think, well, obviously R.O.B is good versus Sephiroth. That's kind of like a fake Fighter Pass 2 character, but like versus Steve Kazuya, I think R.O.B beats both. Like, I start with Kazuya. So me and Riddles have been grinding with each other every single major we've both been at, including like when I've just been in his room in Japan. And I'll tell you, our like game counts and stuff have not been close. Like, in a not bragging way, it kind of opened my eyes into like that's the type of character R.O.B, if played well, should almost never lose to, assuming I'm just not getting hit by electric zero to devs. And for Steve, I think R.O.B also can honestly beat Steve, like slightly. And it's gotten to a point where like if I'm fighting a Steve player, I'm super confident just because one, I think R.O.B does good in a matchup. Like honestly, probably a slight win. I think Steve mains don't really know how to understand or how to fight R.O.B that well. And I think me as a player is just super good versus Steve, where it's like, okay, it like all bounces out. And it's gotten me more into the mentality of like, I think R.O.B like has gotten a bit better compared to other characters versus Fighter Pass 2 just because of like what I've played more versus those types of characters. Like, let's say Kazuya. You know that like burner boost and stuff that I do a lot?
Mhm.
Kazuya's pretty slow. What is Kazuya gonna do when I just burner boost out away from him? He's not really able to do a lot, you
Right,
know?
right.
And it's the same with like Steve. He's not really that fast. He can mine, but then Rob's really like able to destroy a lot of his blocks. The main problems with Fighters Pass 2 for Rob is Sora and Aegis. Sora is a weird matchup. I don't get to play it often, and the only times I've played it was Kameme. Kameme, our first set, it was kind of close. It was 3-1, and it was more like literally my first time fighting a good Sora. So, he can get that. Second set, destroyed me. I didn't even go Rob. Because during that set, or during our first set, it felt like, okay, I felt like I was better than Kameme during that set, which right now, I don't think I'm better than Kameme, right? But during that time, I was like, damn, I feel like I'm only really losing because he's just, Sora, Nair, Nair combos on me. And Rob, like, he's just a big character. Like, there's just sometimes, like, I got to hold that L. But then I tried my secondaries, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think my secondaries are going to be Kameme either. So it's like, I haven't played Sora enough to confidently, like, place him anywhere. But from the little that I have played with Kameme, it always felt like it's just hard, right? He's just a combo character versus a really big character. And if they have their execution on deck, it's like GG's. And in Aegis, with Foot still down here now, it's honestly not as bad as I thought. And it's not even like the other Rob players struggle versus Aegis players. And mostly a meat issue with like, Anathema beating Cosmos. The Japanese Rob SSSR also beat Cosmos. And it's like, this is more of a meat thing, right? And it's still a bad matchup, right? But it's not like super terrible. Like, I showed it off with Battle BC and now Crown, where it's like new developments with Futsal down there, understanding like just spacing and how to like bait approaches from a relatively super fast character, where it's like you're always in a way of being in control while also still not having everything favored for you, which is, that's a normal character thing. Not everything is going to be good for you. But I don't know. It just feels like Aegis Rob now is like in a weird spot of like Rob loses, but Rob has pretty good options where if the Aegis player isn't playing on point with like, the combo game and stuff like that, like they could just lose, which I have showed twice now. So pretty good.
Yeah, especially in
And
tournament environment,
yeah.
right, where people get a little bit
Mhm.
nervous or they just kind of maybe do these little panic jumps, and that can cost Aegis stocks upon stocks. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Like fighting someone like Shuton, Battle BC, he destroyed me. It was like, it wasn't a 9 stock, but it was low key a 9 stock, right? And then going from Crown, he was up 2-0, auto momentum, it's winners finals. And then I start 2 stocking him. It's like, okay, what does he do now? Starts becoming more nervous. And it's like, Rob is the character that gets that, right? It's like, oh, catch your jump at 50, I side B you, forward air you. You're in a horrible position, and it's like, it just works. Like, it's a bad matchup, but just because it's a bad matchup doesn't mean sometimes you just don't die, And I don't think it's as bad as I thought it once was, which also is like, it's not like Game & Watch or something like that, where it's like,
Yeah,
yeah.
Ramses and Tony, did you guys have any questions regarding like Fighter Pass 2 versus Rob or anything like that?
Not specific to Fighter Pass 2, but on this topic of like the tournament pressure and like how Rob excels in it, right? Zama, you mentioned that you've been thinking more about, like what you should be doing.
Yeah.
And basically having the confidence to act on the information you're giving in the moment. I feel like one of the things that makes Rob so good is that like his autopilot is like kind of crazy, right? Like good luck beating a Rob just like nairing, gyroing, lasering. Like it's very straightforward in that sense. How do you balance like your new your newfound ability to think effectively in tournament with managing your stamina to be able to use that in the later rounds?
So it's honestly not as hard. it's like pools, like kind of just went brainless. I've went like secondaries and pools just to warm them up sometimes. Then it's usually out of pools, depending on how big the bracket is. Then it'll be like maybe it'll be a good player, but someone who like I should still be without like relatively too much like hardships. Then it's like once you start finding good players, it's like I would do certain things that like makes it easier for me. So like let's say game one, I wouldn't care about game one as much because I'll take game one as like a more informational based round. Like even if I lose game one, that's fine. If I win game one, okay, well, I won while still like holding back a little bit, with like maybe I noticed something from our last sets that maybe they didn't notice that I want to take advantage of, but only later in the set, which is something like you keep that in the back of your head, but you don't have it like overwhelm you to the point where it's like, damn, like maybe I would have won if I, went for the down throw like 50-50 more, where if I know like sometimes they have pretty like okay mash, where I'd rather test that out later on in the set where I feel like it'll matter more. Like say game one and game two happens and, we trade games, or it's like, okay, it's best of three. Whatever happened in those past two games don't really matter at that point. And you kind of have to like understand that sometimes when things move too fast, you also have to move fast enough, or else you're just gonna not really catch up. Like the stamina part, it's like I've played so much Smash to the point where I don't really like get too tired unless it's like way late in like just a day, right? Like I could play for Smash like hours on end, like thinking versus like good players. Like I've had really good grind sessions versus Light, for example, and it's like, yeah, fighting Light like makes me think and all that stuff, but it's like I'm still not like getting impacted too like negatively, where it's like, okay, like I can still go on for another like good hour or two. It's just like I guess I've just practiced like playing while tired, where even though I may like physically or mentally be tired, it's still like not tired in the way that I'm affected. You know what I mean?
I get you entirely.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So my question is actually linking a couple of things that you mentioned. So first, you stated that when you realized in Japan that you are less interested in playing around your opponent winning and more what you can do to win the game instead. How do you link that into your view of bad matchups? Rather, are some bad so what I believe you are alluding to is that you can see how to win bad matchups versus Aegis because you just see the path to win the game, whereas Watch also wins the game, but also stops you from winning the game. Does that sound fair?
You said Game and Watch, right? Your mic cut out a little bit.
Game
Yeah.
Watch versus say Aegis, because
Yeah.
Aegis has that brittleness where she's vulnerable, but Game Watch is also fairly difficult to win against.
Yeah. So the thing about say a character like Aegis, right? Like her main weakness is like it's pretty clear, right? Like she's still like a broken, overtuned, really good character, but there's just opportunities versus her where it's like it's just broken, right? Like you have her off stage, she's not really like she doesn't have a lot of options, right? But then it's when you put a character like Game & Watch in those sad or those same bad positions, they're not really bad for him because he just has so many like better options to avoid everything. Like Game & Watch's recovery is really broken, so I can't really gamble on like, getting a good edge guard on him. Like good luck getting a 2-frame down there on Game & Watch up B as R.O.B. He's a lot smaller to hit just because, like how they just are. So, like if I'm trying the cheese route, then it's like, I might just not hit it just because he's playing like a good far away game and he's not really like in any way has no reason like come forward just because it's like Game Watch's space is Nair. Game Watch Nair beats almost everything R.O.B does. And then I can't even like use my projectiles versus Game Watch because it's like, okay, if I use laser, I make sure better not to use my big one, and if he absorbs it, I could die at 0. if I use gyro, he just reflects it back at me, or shields it. But every character can shield it. And even if I do hit his shield, then he up Bs me, and then now I'm getting all the way to the blast zone with like up B and the up air, up air, up air, and that's like that's just that matchup. It's like if R.O.B isn't like say killing Game & Watch super early because of the Game & Watch making like dumb mistakes, then it's like I kind of just gotta take the L. What am I gonna do versus a good Game & Watch player when they start just throwing me up in the air and limiting my options just because of like how polarizing Game & Watch is to deal with when you're trying to land? Like I even play other characters, like I go Lucina, and it still feels like it's polarizing just because of like how good Game & Watch is at juggling characters. Like when you fight someone like Mia or Meister, it's like, how am I gonna like? When am I gonna land? When is it my turn? Versus a character like Aegis, like there always feels like where even though she's really good in those aspects of like say juggling R.O.B and stuff like that, like if they mess up once in juggling, like I can get back. Like let's say if they miss their up air and like I'm now here, okay, easily able to fall. Now if the Game & Watch misses their up air, well, their up air is already non-committal as is, so then they're just moving into another up air position or a nair or like holding shield and then reacting to like whatever I do. And that's like what R.O.B struggles with. Like there's no real like way. Well, okay, there's a real way, but there's the easy way of winning the matchups and then the hard way. Fighting Game & Watch, especially the higher level you go, it's almost always the hard way you have to figure out, which is not what you want to do as the competitor. You don't really want to like, when I'm fighting someone, like I want to win, right? I'm not fighting the character, I'm fighting more the player. But when that character in turn is just like pretty much able to cover almost everything I want to do, it just doesn't feel feasible at times, especially when they're also as equally locked in as I am, you know?
Yeah, at that point, it doesn't even
So,
feel like you're playing against the player. It feels like the
yeah.
character is holding you back from, or like Game & Watch, right? Like Game & Watch is stopping you from doing your general strategies you like to play and you like to enable for the player versus player strategy, right? Where it's just
Mhm.
like, oh, well, since I'm R.O.B, like these are my general answers to these strategies, and like you just can't really get them going. It feels like Game & Watch completely shuts down R.O.B in the air because R.O.B needs to be in the air for a little bit of time to set up. Very similar to like Cloud falling backer, right? Like Spargo needs to set up the falling backer by doing these short hops or full hops. Same thing with R.O.B. But R.O.B, the R.O.B.'s nair is not as quick as Cloud back air. So it's like, okay, well,
Yeah.
since it starts in the back and then he falls forward with it, it gives Game & Watch ample time to just spam short hop nair or just even up air, and R.O.B just takes so much damage. It seems very,
Yeah.
very difficult. And Game & Watch is such a strong defensive character. Like he has really bad weight, but his shield is so hard to pierce. He's so hard to edge guard. I wouldn't say he's like impossible to juggle, but he has a lot more mix on landing because
Yeah.
of stall and fall. He can fall straight down, left, right. He can even kind of jiggle his down air while he's falling down, like go
Yeah.
right and then left. It's pretty crazy the amount of options he has in disadvantage. And it feels like for you, your bread and butter feels like, oh, okay, well, I'm playing on a fundamental base. I'm trying to win neutral, and then I'm trying to fundamentally hedge my bets on advantage state and make really smart choices, but then also get these really hard reads. But against
Yeah.
Game & Watch, it feels really hard to go for these hard reads because when are you going to get Game & Watch to panic jump? Almost never.
Yeah.
And not a good one anyway, right? Like for the most
Mhm.
part. You hit Nair into forward air against Game & Watch, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, they're just going to sink and go to ledge.
Yeah. It's like, oh, and another hard thing about Game Watch is that all the Game Watch players I mentioned, like Mia Meister, there's a common theme between both of them. They're both not American, meaning I'm not able to like Wi-Fi them like with
Oh,
good
true.
practice. There's no like, there's Monty for like a good American Game Watch, but I live in New York. He lives in California. I'm not gonna be like, hey Monty, you want to grind our hearts out in the R.O.B Game Watch matchup on Wi-Fi?
West Coast,
Like,
East Coast.
yeah, like there's just some things where it's like there's not really a lot of good East Coast game watches, and I'm sure that the good ones that are here, it's like they're not as good comparatively. You know what I mean? Which makes it a lot harder to deal with. Like at least with characters like say Pyramithra, like there's Cosmos. I have there's just a lot more good Aegis players compared to Game Watch players, and there's a lot more like variety between them, right? Like we have Shuton, Leo, Spargo, Cosmos. Yeah, that's a good 4 amount, right? But they're all also like pretty much at every tournament that I'll also be at. Mia and Meister, there's like Mia doesn't travel here. I had to go to Japan to fight him mostly, right? And then Meister, even though Meister travels a lot more, there's still like a lot more easier ways to gain like experience versus Aegis compared to a character like Game Watch. And my also approach in learning matchups, which I struggle in, is I'll pick up the character, right? That's what I did for Pyramithra. I would start fighting, or I'll start using Aegis and be like, okay, what does this character do? And what do other people punish what I do? So then I get a good idea what I should be doing, right? When I'm playing as Game & Watch, it has the sense of like, honestly, it feels like everything I do, I get punished for is more because of what I purposely do. And it's just a wrong option and not necessarily like, oh, this is just what Game Watch struggles in. With like, yeah, like obviously my Game Watch isn't as good as say my Aegis is. It still feels like I'm not getting that necessary like experience, on top of the fact that the matchup is trash, on top of the fact that I feel like it's so bad to the point where I use a secondary for it. Like when I beat Meister at Big House, like a week before, you want to know why I went Lucina?
What's up?
I went Lucina because I thought she was easy. I went Lucina because I didn't have to practice her at all. I had to just use my brain and hopefully I'll win. That's what I did. And it didn't work the first time, but it worked the second time. But did it work the third, fourth, fifth time I'm fighting a Game Watch player now? No. That's because now they're adapting to my not so good Lucina with their ultra main character, where it's like, okay, well, things that I practice with Lucina versus other characters, they just don't work versus Game & Watch. And that's like the big struggle. You know what I mean? Like, say you're fighting Aegis, broken character, but there's so many sword characters and so many players where it's like you can still get a general sense of the idea of like what to do. And in the current meta, especially with now 2 top Game Watch players, it becomes a lot harder for R.O.B to deal with, at least in those scenarios. I've gotten more like comfortable and more positive like thinking towards like most of the bad matchup. Like there's still like a few bad matchups where I'm like, okay, like this is definitely hard. But Game & Watch is the one where, especially at top level, it almost feels like if I beat them with R.O.B, it would be more of a fluke than just, you know, I was just on some fire game, you know what I mean? And that's kind of like the reality part about R.O.B, where it's like, especially with other R.O.B players that aren't stepping up to like combat like Game & Watch, then it's like, okay, I don't really know what to do. And all the other ideas are like, okay, hopefully you 0 to death them 9 times. It's like that's not what's gonna happen, you know? So yeah.
So
Go
go ahead,
Ramses.
Tony. Oh, all right. Well, hearing you talk about R.O.B, I mean, we can agree that the character is relatively linear, right? Like he has a few options that are extremely strong, but it's not like he's gonna overwhelm you the way like a young Link would does like 20 different things. It sounds like a lot of what he does is very like execution checky, right? Like, are you ready to deal with the nair? Are you ready to deal with like the run ups? How do you feel about that quality in tournament? Because I feel like it's a blessing in a lot of ways, because it means that like you can, like, if you change the spacing of your nair just a little bit, like their execution check is gonna fail, you know what I mean? And you can really fuck with like what they're waiting for because of like how hard the execution check is. Like how do you do you think it's a blessing, it's a curse? Like how do you feel about utilizing that execution check nature in tournaments?
I would say in general, it's probably better for Rob, honestly. Like, say Rob down tilt, for example, super fast move. It starts
Mhm.
going for tech chase opportunities. It starts setting for jab block situations, right? Like, let's say even if they have good execution on just, hits the tech button, then if I'm playing on point, I can do a down tilt, say to roll, up smash them. I don't do that a lot just because I feel like down smash is usually just covers most of the options. It's still good even when like say to get backwards because then they're either off stage. Rob usually doesn't struggle when characters are being put at ledge. But that's like the thing about Rob. Like Rob is so good at doing stuff like that. With forward air knocking down tilt, putting you in tech scenarios, like just having different variations of nair timing on your shield, then adding like an item towards the mix. It adds a lot for the opponent to like keep in mind of. And it's not like you're like spamming it over and over again contrary to popular belief. Like it's not like like you said, Young Link, where it's like arrow, 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 side B or boomerang, bomb. And it's like like putting an arrow out there, then it's the gyro, then it's the laser, seeing what they can handle with, and then mixing up with like a down tilt. And it's like if anything really hits, then it's usually a good like conversion. Let's say low percent, like 20%, maybe 30ish, down tilt into jab, right? True combo. Down tilt jab sets into a tech chase scenario. What options do they have? They tech it, dash tack. They roll or tech roll away, dash tack. Tech roll in, guess, dash tack. Pretty much like there's always like just some things where even though it's not guaranteed, it's still guaranteed in the human way. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it might not be the actual like always gonna work, always gonna happen, punish, but in a real setting where people sometimes mess up, where people just succumb to like bad habits and stuff like that, things just work. Like there's definitely been times where I'll do like the down tilt jab and then I'll cover what I think they might do with a down tilt, which would then lead to another situation like that, and then instantly react and just dash attack. And it's like they have like almost no options in these scenarios besides like I mess up, which is when you're playing at the top level and being locked in, like usually for my sake, hopefully I'm not messing up, you know what I mean? And that's
Right.
like
That's not part of the plan.
yeah, like that's like there's no real negatives besides myself, right? Like let's say if they catch on to what I'm doing, if I don't start mixing up even more, like say going for old things I would used to do in like later sets, going for just like different options, that's just completely my fault. That's not Rob's fault. That's just I didn't adapt to their adaptation, that's just a normal thing. So yeah, I would say it's pretty much almost always good for Rob in those scenarios.
Makes a lot of sense.
So, in a matchup like Game & Watch where you don't immediately see the way forward and you don't have other Rob players to look at in the matchup for solutions, what is your problem-solving process for finding where you need to go in that matchup?
So usually, like how I talked earlier about like having space and stuff like that, I would just think about like what space I should be having versus Game Watch and what space they should be having versus me, and just base off like what I think is the good option. And sometimes it'll be like okay, and then sometimes I'm just wrong. And then it's kind of just thinking like back and forth between like okay, like I can make them mess up sometimes, like if I'm playing good enough. And for Game & Watch, it just I don't know. It just feels like sometimes when you do that, like I've gotten some like advice in a matchup. Like I'll ask like Leo, ask like Last, I'll ask other people for like, hey, like what should I be at least looking for more? What should I be trying to like avoid, even though I don't get hit by like certain options where it's like that there's so many things versus Game Watch that I feel like I personally am keeping aware of, but Game Watch is the character where it's like you mess up one time, I don't have the safety of like being able to mess up, you know? Like I've had very real scenarios of like I'll go from like 0 to like 130 just cuz oh, they're playing on point and catching everything I do. I'll go to ledge, chef, chef. Can't really do much. You know, it's not like I'm Shulk where I'm able to go into shield art, you know? It's not like I'm just a way faster character where I could sonic spin dash away. It's like what I've found is more so maybe I should low key just pick up a different character. If not for Game Watch, I don't think I would have played Lucina like ever as like a actual serious character. You know what I mean? Just because of like how I feel like the matchup just is so insanely skewed towards like being bad, and then with my added like not understanding it fully, and other Game Watches do actually play the matchup enough to where it's like way harder than it should be already. It's like pretty tough, you know? So yeah.
Game & Watch is having a huge uptick in play. The fact that there is now another Game & Watch that is placing around Meister, and even sometimes better than Meister. I mean, Mia placing incredibly well as of recently, right? So, and kind of has been going on for a while now, I guess. But the fact that there is essentially 2 Game & Watches that can get top 8 is a very scary fact for you, right? And you've been
Yeah.
struggling with the character. So I know you pick up Lucina, and my idea of pockets in the beginning of Ultimate was like, oh, you have this character you want to play, and then you have the character that covers the bad matchups, like your Wolf or your Palu. That's like you'll probably slightly win the matchup, or it'll at least be even. And now that we're in the late game of Ultimate, I don't have that ideology anymore. I almost feel like it's like, well, instead of your Wolf, Lucina, Palutena like characters for pockets, why not just go all in, right? Like, especially with a character like R.O.B, where it's like, okay, so because as of right now, would you say that Lucina is the only character you're counterpicking?
No.
Or not Lucina,
She,
Game & Watch. Is Game & Watch the only character you're
oh,
counterpicking?
still no.
Oh, still no. Okay.
There's certain matchups that I just as a player struggle in. That I've started counterpicking, and it actually like MPG to Mega Man.
Yeah.
I hate Mega Man R.O.B. Like that's another matchup. Like it's actually just kind of the same thing with like how both of their up airs kind of get a
Yeah.
lot of mileage versus R.O.B. Just because like most of my game plan is like oriented around getting that nair or jumping in air and stuff like that. And both up airs, like non-committal up air, puts me in the air, does a lot of damage, bad spot, and he has also very good options versus Gyro. That's another character I counterpick, and I've beaten MPG before with my Lucina. There's other times like Young Link, which is just like
Oh, that's a
very
tough one.
oppressive versus R.O.B. I've thought Sora, but next time I fight Kameme, I'm definitely just gonna go R.O.B and at least test it out again because my secondaries definitely didn't do that matchup justice, and I'd rather at least try again. Like I've tried more R.O.B versus Game Watch than I've tried versus Sora, so at least try that. Um, at one point, I was even thinking of Aegis before I just decided to start, edge guarding and footstool down airing. But other than that, not really a lot of matchups I counterpick for. Like if I start going for counterpicking more, it'll be for the sake of just improving as that character. Like I've went Falco in bracket versus players I think I just wouldn't lose to ever. And like if I'm just going super try hard. And it's given me the sense of like a new perspective of playing that character, of like improving in a way like and it's just helped more, right? So yeah, like I don't necessarily tend on playing solo R.O.B because I think he can work for like almost every matchup. But then there's certain matchups where I don't think he can work. So then it becomes like, okay, what am I able to do with other characters? Like I've thought about other characters outside of Lucina. I've thought about Falco. I've thought about Aegis. I've thought about Shulk. I've thought about Sonic. And it's always like, what, like, if I'm playing, like, you've talked about, like, maybe a slight winning matchup. Like, if I'm hard counterpicking a character, like, let's say Game and Watch, like, why am I not just going Game and Watch's worst matchup?
Right, exactly. That was my
Learning,
mentality. It's like, why not go like the matchup that is the worst for Game and Watch? It's like absolutely trash for Game and Watch, right?
learn, like, how to fight anti Game and Watch. Like, let's say, I'm pretty sure his worst matchup Shulk, right? It's either Shulk or Sonic. Where it's like, why don't I just learn like a very anti Game and Watch Shulk? Get a good enough Shulk, like fundamentally understand how to play him, understand how to play Shulk versus Game Watch specifically. So like, it doesn't matter if I can't beat, like, let's say a good Bayonetta player with my Shulk, because I'm not gonna worry about that because I have R.O.B. But then if I'm able to only really worry about the one, maybe two matchup I would use that character for, but I learn it so good to the point where it's like I could just keep winning over and over again. Like, why not? I've definitely thought about like just going a super hard matchup for them, like actually putting in the time, and it's like it could work. The thing about that is like usually those types of characters, like Shulk, like he's a more like compare Lucina to Shulk. Lucina, I'm turning my brain off, and it's like, okay, if I'm better than my opponent, usually I'll win. You know what I mean? Can't really bank on that at top level when, they're also not bad at the game. So then it gets to the like, do I want to commit to learning a whole different type of character, even if I think it'll be beneficial, like over long term? But if I can't guarantee it'll be like so good, like Shulk's so unique to like no one has really picked up Shulk that's like new and like succeeded. And no one has really like used Shulk in a way like besides like old Kome, where it's like an actual threat. Like,
You're talking like new players, right? Like younger players?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right, okay.
Like there's people like say on the lower end of like, like the rankings and stuff like that use Shulk. And they're good, but that's not my type of goal, like even though it's a hard matchup, I would still doubt these types of players would be beating like Meister Mia, which is what I'm trying to do. You know what I mean? So then it becomes like, should I not? And that's why I've leaned more towards like using like an easier, relatively. It might not be as good of a matchup. Like Meister has told me he thinks Lucina Game Watch is even, which I also like. I could see Lucina winning, but I'm not gonna like act like I know more about the matchup than him. So it's like, do I prefer to use like the easy option that I might have to work more on in the actual gameplay, or would I use the more harder option that's more rewarding? And that's the kind of like crossroad I'm at right now with like certain characters. But some days it leans towards where like, hey, why not like complete, like I'm in summer vacation right now. It's a lot more extra time to work on stuff. It's like, why not? You know what I mean? So yeah.
It always feels like, a theme throughout this episode just feels like it feels like you always gravitate towards that fundamental part, right? Where it's like you're striving to, at the end of the day, like, okay, well, at the end of the day, if I understand the game more, if I'm fundamentally stronger and I pick X character, like I should win, and I've
Yeah.
heard you say that multiple times, and it feels like you're kind of going towards that route. I think the last topic I would like to go over, which I think is a very unique topic because I mean, just your rise within the scene and, just coming up as a top player, I think a lot of people are curious on your training regimen. And I know you're in a very strong region, you're in New York, aka tri-state, right? So you have a lot of access to a bunch of tournaments. And to my knowledge, you don't grind too much at home. And I know you've like said this on Twitter a lot. So why don't you tell the viewers like, okay, like, because I feel like everyone has a perception of a top player, like, okay, yeah, they probably spend like 1 to 2 hours in the lab, and then they get on Wi-Fi and do X, Y, and Z. And I know for you, you're a little bit more unique. Obviously, your environment promotes this, but to
Yeah.
my knowledge, most of your practice, if not all of it, is just sheer tournament.
So a lot of my practice. So I'll talk about what I think has been the best practice for me, and I've always been doing as like what made me like become like the Smash Retort Zomba into like now, which has always been just sheer theory crafting, right? Like it's not even like I'll be home like playing the game. It'll be like I'll be outside like just walking around, and I'll start thinking like, how could I edge guard Aegis more efficiently? You know what I mean? And I'll start like just thinking over and over to myself like what could I do that makes it harder for them, you know? And that's what's helped me more like think of more like straight line thinking of like say the stamina talk, right? Like it's a good autopilot to have versus like the lower worse good players. And then now when you start like going level to level, then it's like more specific. Like what is an option Leia would do here that I think is good to cover there? You know what I mean? And that's like I feel like a really big part of the game that a lot of players, especially lower level players, like they don't really like do often. And it's even like top players like they won't do as much. Like let's talk about the R.O.B difference. So at Smash World Tour, me and Anatoma were talking. This was like after like this is when I was done with bracket, right? And this was a conversation about why I would do up throw forward air compared to up throw angled up F tilt at low percent. And he had the idea of that like his combo the up throw F tilt was more like does more damage, right? It's a true combo. It'll work more consistently. But then my idea was even though up throw forward air, sometimes it's unsafe on hit. It does less damage. Sometimes it's just completely not true and it's just more of a DI check on my opponent, right? Would you rather get hit by forward air and get potentially sent off stage versus the R.O.B? Or would you rather take the extra 2% versus the forward tilt and like nothing really happens? You know what I mean? And that's what I tried like talking about, where it's like, yeah, like I'm taking away like say more guaranteed damage for more like inconsistent follow up, which is still like after forward air, I hit it so consistently to the point where it might not be a true combo, but then it becomes in practice, it is like the combo I'm more looking forward to, even if it's not necessarily what I should be doing at like a technical frame level. You know what I mean? Right? And it's like if I hit my up throw forward air, then they're at a spot where it's like read a jump, I could kill them. I read if they're going downwards, I'm also able to kill them. If they start drifting closer to me, I can kill them. There's so many scenarios where it's like I can cover X and they do Y and I'm still in a good position, right? There's like so many avenues R.O.B's able to do, which is why having to think everything out and like theory crafting like potential things that my opponent would do, what I should be doing. Like I started doing down tilt into boosted F tilt, right? Like no one's gonna be doing that besides me, because it's like it's a thing that's like who thinks that, right? Who's gonna be doing that? And it's like it's good. It worked versus Shuton. It works versus Gluto. It works versus Sonics. It's a true combo sometimes, and it's a good thing to catch someone off guard. But who is thinking, yeah, if I R.O.B, I'm gonna go for boosted F tilt, you know? It's like a weird option that turned into a very scary, real like threat to someone. You know what I mean? And that's what I've been just trying to do more. Just think more smart about the game, think more what I'm able to do. Because improvement doesn't just come from like actually playing. Like I don't play often. I play mostly when I'm at tournaments. And when I do play the game when I'm like with people, it's usually of people that like they're not even PR in our region, right? Like these are players like I could be consistently beating them while going random and like trolling the whole time. You know what I mean? It's like it's not like I'm light where I'm fighting like Cosmos and Tweak in the 5-hour grind session together. You know what I mean? It's like I'm just thinking more in terms of like, yeah, like I could be doing this better. I could be doing this instead of that. And then I apply it versus like say worse players, because let's say if it's a true combo like down tilt F tilt, just because it's on a worse player doesn't mean it isn't a true combo. You know what I mean? And that's what I started like doing more. Like I don't even enter that many like local tournaments in my region. Like I only like I'm about to start entering more just because I feel like I should still give myself that extra level of like local scene practice that not like I'm lucky to be able to just do that just because my region is as strong as it is, but it's still like not necessarily needed. And that's what I feel like a lot of like players, especially lower level players, like don't really like do, because they think it's more like, if I grind X amount of hours a day, I'll just get better. And yeah, maybe you could, but are you really getting better at the game, or are you just thinking you're getting better? You know what I mean? And that's kind of like what I've done more, and I felt it's been better for me.
So in a lot of the, I'm sorry, Tony, I keep cutting you off. In a lot of the theory crafting that you're talking about, it's very like advantage state related. Like, how do I edge guard ages? What do I do as a follow up? For your next steps, for you as a player, what do you think you should be focusing on? Is there more to gain, like your advantage, your disadvantage, your neutral? Like, is there anything that you're focusing on for the next period?
So yeah, it's definitely more like just how to have a more smarter disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like Rob's disadvantage, it's not good, but that's honestly a lie. I think it's honestly pretty good for how compared it is to the roster, just because he's able to fly, just because he can have the gyro in hand. I was rewatching a lot of like my sits back at Crown, and I'll be like inches away from dying, but then I'll like slightly move while I'm up being, and then I'll have a gyro, and it's like, oh, throw the gyro. Like the game
Yeah.
4 versus me and Leo, like there were so many times where like, yeah, if I did like the more like slightly different recovery pattern, I would lose. But then it's like once you start like thinking just more in terms of like, how do I avoid like even the tiniest possible chance of like I might lose, right? Where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
say Byleth down there is coming, right? Go like, this is Byleth there, this is R.O.B, then it's like just slightly weaving past it, then punish. And then that like that's the end of me versus Leo's game 4, where it's like that scenario happens, I hit him for it, then I get back on stage, and then he messes up and I grab him and I win. Like those tiny like disadvantage options just change everything, because yeah, you can have as good of an advantage as you want, but then you're not always going to play perfect, and you're going to sometimes just be in disadvantage. Doesn't matter like what's happening. Like I died really early when I fought versus Leo. I died really early when I fought versus Tweak. They both like dared me when I shouldn't have gotten hit, but I did. And then that's more thinking like, well, I messed up there. That's just completely my fault. What could I do to avoid dying there, right? And then it started getting better, because then I would live like a lot longer. Like I would see myself living till literally like 200% versus people, because it's like, well, if I'm playing a smart like game with being still in a bad position, like there's only so many things they could do, where if I'm actively playing around everything, like it just works.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's yeah.
Makes
So I was
sense.
going to ask for a clarifying point on what you mentioned that helped you reach the point for Smash World Tour. So you mentioned that the bulk of your time for improvement process was just thinking, essentially playing the game in your mind,
Yeah.
and thinking through situations. So what would you say the building blocks in the 5 years of playing competitive Smash before that point were? Like what do you feel that you needed to establish in order to start focusing on your theory crafting?
Well, here, I'll say this. So what made me start thinking, this was during the Wi-Fi era a little bit. I was watching an Epic Gabriel versus Bestness VOD on Wi-Fi. And me and Gabriel boys, this was the time when he was the better R.O.B player. And I was just watching his VODs and stuff like that. And I noticed he like he put gyro at ledge, dash backed, and then reacted as best as you can on Wi-Fi, and did like cut like, this is stage, R.O.B, he's here, goes back, jump nairs, and I literally paused the video, and like in Jimmy Neutron where like it's like the brain and stuff like that, that just happened to me, and I was like, huh, that was like, that was pretty smart. Because it's like gyro covers like a lot of the ledge options are ready. If they start jumping, then you're gonna hit the nair and then be able to get a side B. If they start rolling in while you're, dashing back, then it's like, oh, punish the roll. And then there's like that made me start watching an Epic Gabriel Wi-Fi VOD. Literally made me start thinking, because I was like, why did he do that option? Like, I didn't think when playing. Like, during that time, like Wi-Fi, I was still like 15, 14 years old. I was like, it's like I wasn't even bad during that time. Like, I still went to majors and did like, the only major I've been to before COVID was the LMBM. Before,
okay,
like,
okay.
COVID
Right,
happened.
right.
And
You
I
won
beat
right before
Rido.
quarantine, right? Let's
Mhm.
make big moves. Right.
Yeah. And I beat Rido. And that's like, who I don't fight Duck Hunt. So it's like, I'm not winning that unless, I'm playing like really good during that point. There's also really like good wins I had during that time period too. Like, I beat Rivers during his peak when he was like top 20 at a PGR event. Like, but that was still during a time when like I was just pushing buttons, right? When I was playing Link and Bracket during that time, I wasn't thinking. I was pressing Nair and forward air and spamming bomb. You know what I mean?
The Zomba Link.
Like, I wasn't in the headspace of like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna do this Nair option and then react to what they're gonna be doing next. I was thinking more like, here, I'm a Nair because it's a pretty good move. Like, that Steve meme where it's like, oh, I'm a side B because it's strong. That was literally what I was doing, and it was working, but it wasn't working to the level that I wanted it to be. So then, I started watching Epic Gabriel Wi-Fi VODs, and then it clicked. Maybe I should start thinking while playing, and then that kind of just, it came out. Like, I entered those Wi-Fi Smash for Tour events, and it's not like I even did good during them. And the Wi-Fi events I did enter after that, I also wasn't really doing that good. And it was like, okay, well, I always knew I wasn't as good on Wi-Fi because I was still PR in Tri-State before COVID and stuff like that. But it wasn't like I would be like number 12, number 14. You know what I mean? I wasn't like that big of a threat. I would be like, "Ooh, this is like the 14-year-old kid that's like pretty good." That was me during that time. But then once I started thinking personally and started like, I still did some of the same things. Like, I would still, when I played Wi-Fi during that time, I would still play with top players. I used to own the Money Match Discord during the Wi-Fi days, and during that time, a lot of top players were in it, like Louis Money, Cola, Bestness, Spargo was in that server, Bloom Forever was in that server, and it was like I was still playing with good experience, and then it just all like shaped to like what is now happening. Like, I would do randubs to like 3 in the morning with like a bunch of random top players, and that made me start like understanding the game at a more fundamental level. That made me start thinking, you know what I mean? Randubs and Wi-Fi router view of Epic Gabriel made me better.
It's Epic Gabriel's set play with the top in that one specific scenario, that one piece of set play,
Yeah.
just like Jimmy Neutroned you, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. He just covered every single option all at once. So it's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, like,
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know, 14-year-old brain works, I guess.
Oh,
So many. If only I started thinking earlier. That's kind of like the only thing that has made me be like, damn, like, what if I used my brain? and then I did.
yeah, it's so crazy. I can't even relate to that because, I mean, well, one, I'm much older, and then two, I started competing in Brawl when I was 16. So like I didn't even compete in Smash or like play Smash like that when I was that young. So I can't even comprehend like how would a 14-year-old think like through my own experience, because I started when I was 16 playing in Brawl, and obviously it was a different game. So yeah, very very interesting stuff, Zomba. It was great having you on the show. We're at about an hour here, so did you have any closing thoughts or shout outs, Zomba, before we close it out?
Well, I'll just say one thing about when you played at 16. I started playing. So I went to my first local when I was 10 years old.
Jeez, holy shit.
Yeah.
Wow.
And me and Spargo, number one player right now, we knew each other during the Wi-Fi days when we were literally like 9 years old.
Damn, that's wild.
So that's like to say like people obviously can improve, right? And especially to like like any like worst players that like watch this or whatever and want to know the mind of Zomba, like I'm turning 18 this year, right? Think of all the young players that play this game. I've been playing for pretty much half my life at this point. And if you don't even factor like when you're a young child, like a baby, and you're not like actually like, like knowing like when you're like a 2-year-old, I've been playing for a majority of my life at this point. And I still plan on that. And you're able to just, get really good, right? It's gonna take a lot of like, discipline. Like just because I started thinking didn't mean I was automatically starting to win, There was still like that trial period of like, yeah, I was still like good, but I wasn't like good. And that's like the kind of thing, like a lot of people get discouraged because they're like, oh, look at all these young players. Like, yeah, time is really important to have, obviously, but just because people may have extra time on you, just because people may have like already be at like at the top level while you're still at the lower levels, doesn't mean that gap isn't just able to be made up like, pretty measly. And that's what I feel like a lot of like players need is like more like they need more like hope and like the non-cheesy way. And that's like I feel like I'm one of those players where it's like, dude, when I was 9 years old playing on Smash 3DS during like Discord days, like it's not like I was playing in mind of like, yeah, like I'm definitely gonna be like this top player. I was thinking more like, yeah, like I want to be the best in Staten Island, New York. You know what I mean? And things can just no, they can happen. And it's just like, don't give up if you think there's like some like small thing, because time can definitely be just overtaken by like a lot of things. But yeah, that's all I have to say, really.
All right. Well, thank you, Zomba, for the inspirational words, and it was also very cool to see your insight on the game, your perspective of the game in terms of like positioning, neutral, advantage state, disadvantage state. So it was a great treat to go ahead and pick your mind on the current meta of R.O.B and just the current meta in general. I hope you guys enjoyed the content. If you guys do want to support the content, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And also check Zomba out on Metafy. You can also check out his R.O.B deconstructed guide on Metafy as well. But until next time, class dismissed.
See you.